Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just doing a video for you now because I actually have a few things on the go here, and I thought maybe you might be interested in seeing what the inside of a BMW final drive actually looks like. This one happens to be out of a GSPD R100 Paralever. It has detail differences to even back to the /5, but the general principle is the same. Some of the bearings are different, they've been updated and they've changed some things, but you'll get the idea regardless of whatever model you have. Replacing a chain and sprocket is a crown wheel and pinion and a drive shaft. So this here is the pinion, that's the pinion gear there, that's the crown wheel there. They meet together and they drive the rear wheel around. The drive shaft goes on here. Now this particular bike has done around 500,000 Ks, and most people treat these final drives as if they're white man's magic, and so they should, because they can be a proper pain in the neck to work on. But this one's in very good condition. Having done 500,000 Ks, it's never had even a seal on it, so it's in pretty good order. So this little hub that you see on the back of all of the bikes, you can see there's a knob here. Every model has it in one way or another, and it contains a tapered roller bearing, which I call the outrigger bearing. I don't know what the correct term is, and to be honest with you, all the washer counters can come out and help me with that. But there it is there. It's almost the same bearing as what you find on a steering head, different size of course as it would be, and this crown wheel actually supported and runs in a giant roller bearing. There it is there, ball bearing, not a roller bearing, a ball bearing in there. There's a seal that goes in behind there that keeps the oil in the differential or final drive housing. This is the flange that the wheel bolts onto. This is the tube that the brake comes through. This is a pivot point for the brake. These holes around here correspond with these holes around here, and the centre bolts into the housing. There is a O-ring there to seal it. So essentially you got a crown wheel and a pinion. They are what provide the drive. There are actually 4 bearings in this outfit that support all this happening. So you can see from the number of bearings in this particular bearing, which I'll come to in a second, that's a massive bearing. On this shaft here where it goes through, so you've only got the distance from there where my finger is, where the big bearing is, to here where there is still a needle roller bearing installed. I haven't taken it out yet. So there's a needle roller bearing in there and a support bearing there, and the pinion sits in the middle, and the crown wheel runs around the outside of that, as you can see. On top of that, that's just supporting the pinion. Now supporting the crown wheel, you've got a tapered roller bearing and a giant ball race there. So from that, you would not need to be Einstein to figure out that there is a hell of a side load and radial and axial loading on this setup. While I'm at it, people who are using sidecars, I've often been told, must change this alloy centre to a steel one. And I've done a lot of asking and research on that, and I'm going to leave that up to the individual owners of what they do there. I always assumed that that was because the flogging that it would get would flog this alloy centre in the steel gear housing, because it is actually not an alloy centre. It's a full steel gear. That's the other side of it. This here is pressed in to hold nothing more than this outrigger bearing. And I've done a lot of asking. Michael Schneering rides an R80 GS with a chair on it. He's done it for many, many years, and he rides it very hard when he does ride it. He has an alloy centre in his. He's not saying that you shouldn't change them either. All the people that I've struck who have had an issue with this, and to be honest, there's only 2. There was 4 or 5 people told me about it, but one of them was the same bike. It actually snaps the spigot that this bearing is here, is what happens to them apparently. I've never seen one, and I've only found a few people who even can tell me how and when, but apparently it happens. So if you're going to run a sidecar on your bike, apart from the frame strengthening and everything else, you need to give some consideration to how you're going to ride it. If you're going to be sliding it around a racetrack, I certainly would put a steel gear in it, a steel centre in it. The rest of it is entirely up to you to research and make up your mind. Now, to set all this up, so in here there are 3 lots of shims. There's a shim behind there. You can see my finger on it. There is a big shim that sits inside this lip here against that bearing, against there, in there. Now those two shims there do nothing more than determine the height inside the assembly, this one, of the crown wheel. So that shim there moves the crown wheel in and out. The shim in here behind here is what tightens the whole process up. So you've got to shim that so that when you pull the housing down, that big shim around the bearing stops any end float. So it goes up and down. It's got to be a precise measurement. Too much, it's got to have enough tension on it to preload that bearing properly. That shim has to be the right height to create a clearance between the pinion and the crown wheel. Otherwise, you don't get any backlash and the gears will eat each other. And the shim in there, I know this is complicated, but it's there to pack everything tightly together with the correct preload and maintain the distance that shim there is putting. So that shim there is creating the backlash clearance. The shim on the top is tightening it all down and setting the preload. So you're working there, and then you also have a big shim that goes in here, on there. Here it is here. That shim fits on there like that, and that shim controls the depth to which the pinion goes on to the crown wheel. So when you set this up, you can take it apart 5 or 6 times to get the clearance right, because what you do then is you put engineer's blue on all the teeth and you run it forwards and backwards, assemble it all and run it forwards and backwards to see what the markings are on the teeth. And in the workshop manual that comes from BMW, there is a set of drawings that show how the correct pattern should look when it's all tensioned down. And once you've done that, you then have to make sure that you've got the correct amount of backlash. So the backlash, as I said before, is set by this height here, the depth in here, rock it backwards and forwards. If you don't have a certain amount of backlash in there, it'll strip all the teeth off the gears. It needs to be able to move around when you accelerate and decelerate. So how is it done? This is a very complicated bearing. As you can see, it is a real mission, this thing. It is a ball race there and a roller race inside. One is for radial thrust, one is for axial thrust. So there's so much force goes on that pinion with the on and off that it needs 2 different kinds of bearings working together to allow that shaft to run properly without destroying itself. So you have a radial thrust component and an axial thrust component controlled in that bearing. It is supported a matter of an inch away by another high output needle roller bearing in the centre of the housing. Complicated, hey? Simple but complicated. That's why they are so good. This seal ring here holds the pinion oil seal. It also goes up this shaft here, and as you can see, as you screw it home, it actually crushes this bearing together and makes it properly preloaded for the job that it has to do. So this is a crucial thing. It's not just for holding a seal, it also holds that bearing together. And finally, you put this nut back on, which is it's relieved to clear the seal housing and all the rest. It's a very intricate thing. It goes down on this thread. It's torqued up to about 160 or 70 foot-pounds, and that pulls everything back against this seal ring and sets this all up, which is why you've got to assemble it and disassemble it every time you do it to run properly and without any movement at all. Now, the reason this is apart is this has got now, after 500,000 Ks, some movement. I believe it's in the roller, the roller bearing, not the ball bearing. And I think although that there is in perfect condition after 500,000 Ks, I think there's some slight axial wear in the little needle roller bearing. So we're going to replace all the bearings in this one. You need some special tools. You need a special deep socket castellated nut to get the seal out, and that one there is, they're both impact driven. One, as you can see, is a 3/4 drive. Sometimes you need to use a rattle gun to get those seals out, and sometimes, funnily enough, that's the safest thing and the nicest thing to the housing to do, because the big loads that you can put on with a big pipe and a big bar can actually slip and crack and break things in a heartbeat. Now, while I'm talking to you, I'm going to show you just 2 other things quickly. Firstly, this is a valve. Now, people this valve here has come out of an engine that I'm rebuilding, and the edge on that valve is sharp enough to cut you. It's not hammered. The seat's not hammered like you would expect to see in a valve that's worn out or recessing in the head. I think it's been cut like that at some point in its life. I don't really know. But it's so sharp you can actually cut yourself on it, and we got it out before it did some damage to something, which was handy. The other thing is conrods and bearings. So these are going back into a rebuilt engine in a minute or two. This engine has done a lot of miles. As a precaution, I always have them line bored and balanced, magnafluxed, and new conrod bushes put in them. So there is another procedure if you're ever going to rebuild your engine and just throw a set of bearing shells in it. You should take the trouble to look on the internet and find out about how the bearing crush works, your tapers, how to plastigauge your crankshaft. If you're in any doubt, take the thing to an engineering shop and get them to do it for you. Just throwing a set of big end bearings in something and a set of rings might make the bike go better, but it certainly won't recondition the engine. Anyway, I hope that helps. I hope you enjoy these little videos. I tried to do something to show people what's in their bikes. Valves. If you're going to do something with your motorbike, do the heads, change the valves before they drop and destroy your engine. Ride safely, stay well, until we meet again.